Thanks for staying with We FM 106.3. It's now 5 minutes past 3 o'clock. If you are just joining us, you're welcome. You're listening to Frankly Speaking. My name's Camry. Right, interesting views all during the first part of the program. And before the top of the hour there, I was reading to you the statement of Senator Basiru. Senator Basiru is the chairman of the Senate Committee on Media and Public Affairs. He was speaking to the press after the service chiefs and intelligence chiefs appeared before the Senate. And I'll continue from where I stopped. So Senator Basiru said, "The Senate's leadership expressed our gratitude for their forthrightness, for their being very open to us, and we are committed to ensuring that all necessary legislative and appropriation support is given to all the relevant agencies as may be subsequently requested. I think that is what transpired in summary at the closed session." The senator also added, "We did not talk about money. We did not talk about figures. We had a high-level discussion on general challenges and requirements for us to have an efficient and effective security. The details of whatever will go into supplementary appropriation can only be worked upon by the Ministry of Finance, which is an executive arm together with our relevant committee, and such are not matters that we will go into details. Of course, everybody knows that security is a serious matter for which you cannot take with levity when it comes to ensuring appropriate appropriations for that. We are ready to receive supplementary budgets. We don't have any doubt that there is synergy among the various security agencies. In fact, from the nature of the briefing that we received, it reassured us as elected representatives of the people that there is indeed a synergy. In any event, even a success that has been made, which we were apprised of, is like security is something you only feel the impact when there are breaches. Nobody will give you credit for security situations you have been able to address and attend to. For instance, we have a tremendous status quo report that a lot had gone into stemming the tide of insecurity in Nigeria. Perhaps, if not for that synergy and the efforts that have gone in terms of operationalizing and putting the Nigerian security organization, particularly the Air Force, in proper shape, perhaps we would have been in a more terrible situation. So the story is about how far we have gone, but beg your pardon. So the story is about how far we have gone, but then there is room for improvement, and we are committed to that improvement. All right, the senator was also asked if he was satisfied with the plans that were tabled by the security chiefs in restoring, peace to our country, and he said, "After listening to the briefings, I personally became upbeat that a lot of work had gone into addressing the problem of insecurity, and from the various perspectives that were brought into the discussion, which is very frank, clear, and without any form of duplicity. It became very clear that Nigerian security agencies are not only looking at the internal dimension of the challenge we have, we look at all ramifications, both in terms of the political context, the economic context, and international context to the development. There were even perspectives as to what happened recently in Chad. So it was a very thorough discussion, and I also believe that the forthrightness of the leadership of the security agencies showed the seriousness that they attached to those duties. So I believe that going forward, the confidence has been built between the security chiefs on one hand and the Nigerian Parliament on the other hand, and that will be a good signal of what we expect in the future." All right, so that's, again, Senator Basiru. He's the chairman of the Senate Committee on Media and Public Affairs, speaking to the press shortly after the military and security chiefs appeared before the Senate to talk about the state of security in the country. Right, talking about the Senate, it's time for us to switch now to Legislative Hour. And it's a program we bring to you every Friday, is a Legislative Hour. This is an informative platform which educates the public on the legislative arm of government. A Legislative Hour also affords legislators an opportunity to showcase their efforts as they meet their constituents through questions, all right, which we will be harvesting from you and presenting to them. That's what Legislative Hour is all about. It's about us deepening our democracy by understanding one arm of government, in particular the legislative arm of government. Very, very important now. It's a program that I sit down with every Friday and co-host with Oke Epia. Let me just welcome him to the studio now. Oke Epia is the Executive Director of Order Paper. Welcome and happy Friday, I should say.
Thank you. Good to be here as always.
Oh, yes. Another session of people to whip out their pen, their paper, and let's get to the learning. That's what it's all about. Knowledge.
Precisely.
Knowledge is key. All right. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about a number of issues. We will, of course, update you on notable events at the National Assembly, but we're going in search of answers to the questions. Now, a couple of days ago, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, that's Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, he said that all committees that are yet to do so should submit their reports on or before the 25th of May 2021. And some committees have been very, very tardy in their work. All right, we're not sure the reasons yet. We'll try and get into it. And as a result of that, a motion was passed, and those committees have been, I don't know what the proper term is, disregarded, or is it disbanded? They've been set aside basically for not meeting some of their marks. Some of these committees were set up as far back as 2019. So the Speaker not happy about the way things were going, and that's the line of action. Now, one of the reasons given for the challenges in these committees concluding their work in a timely manner was the question of funding. And, it's not the first time we're hearing about funding in the National Assembly. Some people have called up on our various programs over the last few years saying, oh, well, the legislative arm of government is, funded to a certain extent. They are paid this, that, the other. But here we are. The minority leader, for example, he said, look, funding needs to be made available for committee work as it when due. So these are some of the things we hope to unpack as we go forwards. So, again, good to have Oke once again to try and spotlight the innards of the National Assembly. That's his expertise. All right, so, Oke, interesting week at the National Assembly and interesting position taken by the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So what do you make of it as he discharged some of these committees? Again, 2019, I don't know whether it's a long time ago or if they've not had enough time. I don't know how these things work. What are your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Camry. This discussion is very important because it speaks to an appraisal of some sort of the Parliament, of the House of Representatives as an institution. And it also speaks to an appraisal of the individual lawmakers. Like we have said here on this program, when you speak about the National Assembly or the States Assembly, you speak within the context of its duties. Three broad areas of, functions of the legislature: lawmaking, oversight, and representative functions. Yes. So these broad areas are metrics with which the parliaments could be and is usually assessed. What the Speaker has done is some form of internal self-assessment to say that, look, we are bracing up to midterm, of a 4-year tenure, and from what we see, we think that these committees, ad hoc or standing committees, I think these are ad hoc committees, they have not discharged their responsibilities pretty much. And that bears on the overall performance of the institution itself, of the House of Representatives. Because every day this is why people say there's a lot of motion with that movement from that arm of government. So you see and hear of the drama all of the time. This motion has been passed, this probe has been authorized, this has been done. All of these get to be actualized through the instrumentalities of committees, some of which are ad hoc in nature. So if committees that have mandates referred to them do not discharge those functions, it bears negatively on the overall performance of the institution. And that becomes like, oh, what's are these people even doing? So it brings up the question over and over again. And so I think that what the leadership of the House of Representatives has done is quite commendable. It speaks to the needs of self-assessments, and I dare say that it speaks to some form of responsiveness to the yearnings or to the desires of Nigerians to see performance. We have several issues, besetting the country, and some of these issues are meant to have been treated by some of these committees, and they have come up with excuses, funding this, that. But for the Speaker to have discharged some of these committees of their responsibilities clearly suggests that those excuses do not cut it or do not completely cut it. So I think that it's important that we see it in this context. And when it raises the issue of funding, like some of them have, tried to present as excuse, it becomes quite intriguing. It becomes quite interesting. It becomes a public relations matter. It becomes an image problem for the National Assembly. Because here we are with the impression, wrongly I dare say, that the National Assembly is overfunded, receives too much money to do its task. And here we're here saying, the Speaker, the institution itself saying that we are underfunded. We do not have enough money. So committees are not even able to optimally function, And so that is one awareness that we must try to accept. It's a reality that we must try to accept with regards to the workings of the parliament. Otherwise, we would be apportioning blames and, making judgment calls on the institution that may not be objective, So the excuse of funding, why not entirely plausible, certainly cannot be dismissed, and it raises the debate all over again. Does the National Assembly have more money, have enough money to perform its functions?
That's a big question. Now, okay, you mentioned a couple of things, and I think it's an opportunity for us to further educate our listener. You talked about standing committee and ad hoc committee. Now, the Speaker has discharged ad hoc committees. They are ad hoc committees. What's the difference between the two?
Right. So, in the life of an assembly, okay, let me begin this way. The legislature functions through the instrumentalities of committees. So, it has plenary sessions. It sits in plenary where decisions are made. To do further legislative work on these decisions, the entire plenary does not have to sit. Otherwise, that would be cacophony. That would be, that would just be, it cannot be organized. So the work of Parliament is broken down into committee levels. That is why across governance lines, across sectors, you have committees responsible for each. That's why you have committees in charge of communication, committees in charge of anti-corruption. So all the sectors have committees that look after their affairs. These standing committees are created by the standing orders of the House of Representatives or the Senate, as the case may be, or even the State Assembly, as the case may be. They are created and, let me say, legislated in quotes by the rules of the House itself. So you know that these are committees that stay throughout the lifespan of the Assembly, right? But certain issues come up. Emerging issues or certain things that would require dedicated attention and say, look, because this issue is urgent, for instance, or because this issue is emerging, we did not contemplate it, we'll empanel an ad hoc committee. An ad hoc committee in this sense is not supposed to remain beyond the lifespan of the issues of its mandate. So when it discharges its mandate, when it submits its report and its report is received and dealt with by plenary, that committee stands dissolved. That is why it is called ad hoc committee. Unlike the standing committee that continues to remain throughout the lifespan of the Assembly. That's the difference.
All right. Thank you so much for that very, very clear explanation. Now, we understand the budget for the for one arm of government, the legislative arm of government this year was 134 billion. Now, I think this is where it's a bit difficult for Nigerians to process because if you sit down and speak to a legislator, they will tell you this money is not only for us. We have this under the legislative arm of government. Because, many times when people talk, we say, oh, the National Assembly, which is a part of the legislature. It's not the only part. The National Assembly got 134 billion. It's not actually, that's not a correct representation, is it? Because 134 billion was budgeted for the legislative arm of government, which includes different ancillaries, the Institute of Legislative Studies, and so on and so forth, the staff, the this, that, the other. That's all included. So it's not just money that's set aside for the senators and representatives alone. And I think this is where we're mixing up the communication. And I thought it's important we address that from the get-go, and then we start to question how much is available to this, that, the other, how is it being used?
Precisely, unfortunately, this, rigmarole over the funding or the budgetary allocation to the National Assembly is self-inflicted on the institution. I say that because they are aware that they have an image problem, and some of which is also self-inflicted, but they haven't quite consciously and conscientiously sustained a response that convinces the public that they are actually trying to solve this problem. So
as far as people are concerned, 30 million naira a month, and you tell me you don't have money to go and do your work.
That's a precise example. So why is it convenient, for you have 13 million naira a month, or as your allowance, whatever it is, how many Nigerian officials, how many Nigerians are privileged to earn, anything close to half of that kind of amount of money? Now, there is the question about, it is not a salary, it is an allowance for this, for that, for that. But you see, like I said, this is self-inflicted because the institution and lawmakers themselves have not been able to convincingly engage the public to break down these figures. If you recall, there was a huge campaign around openness. Tell us how much you earn, give us the details. These things could have been resolved. You say, okay, throw open the books and this is it and this is that. But, for one reason or the other, these things have not been done. So the impression continues to remain that, look, these people, they are overfunded, 30 million naira a month, these bogus amounts of money. Yes, but the truth of the matter is that enough to fund an entire arm of government? Like you try to note, a government arm that has several institutions. The National Assembly has two arms. It's a bicameral legislature. Yes. You have the Senate of 109 members. You have the House of Representatives of 360 members. You have the National Assembly management, that caters for the staffing and all of that supports the institution itself. And then you have the National Assembly Service Commission,
yes,
which is like the Federal Civil Service Commission with its own budgetary allocation. And then you have the National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies that is also taken from that allocation. And then you also have the Public Complaints Commission. Many people do not know that.
I'm just learning of this. I'll be honest.
It's an arm. It's part of the legislative institution.
Oh, really?
So it gets its budget from that, So all of this is what makes up that 134 billion. The 134 billion is actually a reduction from a few years back. It used to be 150 billion, especially under Senator David Mark, throughout his tenure thereabout, it was 150 billion. And that was when the campaign for openness was at its thick, So the point is, yes, it appears like a huge amount of money. But if you move around this capital, around the corridors, you'll discover that it's not what some agencies somewhere in this government or in government generally uses as intervention funds. Not
True.
Budgetary allocation, intervention funds.
Yeah, an entire ministry.
Exactly, an entire agency, and a parastatal, it has that muscle, to deploy funds as intervention funds, not, So we must be objective. Why we acknowledge that the National Assembly has this image problem. They have their issues that they have failing to deal with. We must realize that this money we are talking about is actually not enough to do all of the work that they do. And this is also, it also bounces off on the performance of the institution. So
yes.
Now committees are not able to discharge their functions because there is no adequate funding for them. And so committees that probably want to go look for other means and ways of discharging their functions, sometimes get into trouble. And we have seen this happen where, certain committees have had issues with MDAs and say, oh, look, you came to ask us for money or you came to do this, and then, papers are bandied around, and before you know it, there's a scandal or two here and there. So all of this is like a whirlpool of reactions and counter-reactions. This is not meaning to say that, again, I repeat, the National Assembly does not have its issues that it must deal with in convincing the public, and in a transparent and accountable manner of why it needs more funds. But clearly, what it has currently, I dare say, is not sufficient to discharge its responsibility as an independent, sufficient, proficient, productive arm of government.
Okay, thank you for bringing up that word. I think the challenge, I do agree with you, the challenge is in the accountability of the insufficient, if that's the case, funding. Accountability meaning, again, open your books and let people have a look so that we will be carried along. We'll be the first to take to the streets and say, no, this is our house. We are the parliament, and we demand, better funding so we can get better service.
Precisely.
And on the image issue, honestly, it doesn't really help. You see the flashy cars, you see the flashy lifestyle. It sends a different message to the everyday Nigerian. So when you stand up and you say, oh, well, I'm not well funded in my work, the Nigerian is forced to look at your watch, your shoe, your car, and ask himself the question, come on, you're kidding, right? So I think these are issues I do agree with you. They can do more. They can do more. But for now, it's a huge challenge. Right, now let me just go through a list of some of the ad hoc committees. It's quite significant, especially given the explanation Oke has just given us now. Ad hoc committees are set up on a needs basis. When the need arises, they're constituted. Now, the discharge committees are, one, ad hoc committee to interface with the executive arm of government and the Islamic movement of Nigeria. And that's the Shiite problem. This was in 2019. That ad hoc committee was set. There's still an ongoing matter, and it's still not submitted its report. And number two, ad hoc committee to investigate the assault and rape of students by teachers at the FCT School of the Blind, right here in Jabi, set up in 2019. Ad hoc committee to investigate the crude oil thefts in Nigeria, set up in 2019. Ad hoc committee on the alleged negligence by the Federal Ministries of Justice and Petroleum Resources in the handling of the federal government and the Process and Industrial Development Limited. That's a P&ID matter, set up in 2019. Ad hoc committee to investigate oil spill cleanups and remediation in the oil-producing states, set up in 2020. Ad hoc committee on recent global crash in the price of crude oil on the Appropriation Act, 2020. Ad hoc committee to investigate the non-inclusion of waste management and disposal in the NLNG Train 7 project, set up in 2020. And this one set up in 2020 as well. The ad hoc committee to investigate the financial budgetary provisions, approvals, and multilateral donations on skills and acquisitions and related programs of the federal government and its agencies, set up in 2020, hasn't done its work. So these were all discharged. These are committees. Speaker of the House of Representatives not too happy about it. So I think it's key regarding the funding. We're not saying that the committee is funded, not funded, or this, that, the other, because what the minority leader said was that funds should be released when they are due. Now, does that mean the funds are there, they're not being released in a timely manner, or that the funds are insufficient and they're not being released in a timely manner? That's why I'm a bit mixed up.
Yes, so before I come to that, you list of committees, other committees that you read.
Yes.
If I may ask, which of them is not important matter?
They're all very, very important.
So how do you have an incidence of rape of School of the Blind?
Honestly.
Right, and it was referred to a committee, and then we have this kind of outcome. Complete non-performance.
It's not good enough.
It's heartbreaking, So, I mean, there can be no reason for that kind of non-performance. I recall the debate on the Shia issue, the first committee that you mentioned.
Yes.
It was a rancorous one. I recall that plenary very well, because the reports filed by, my team from the National Assembly indicated that, it crossed a row, in Parliament. At the end of the day, they had to, I think, go into an executive session to resolve it and come back and eventually make a decision and refer this matter to this ad hoc committee. And almost 2 years down the line, no performance.
No performance.
So you see what I mean by how all of this impacts on the performance of the institution itself.
Oh, yes.
And then you want to, point out those particular legislators who are chairmen of this committee or who are chairpersons of this committee. How do you rate them? So with respect to performance of legislative duties, they have been found wanting. That's
Quite
what
right.
it means.
Quite right. Because these are very important national
They
assignments
have
you've
been
been
found
given.
wanting. So the people that they represent should ask them questions. So we sent you to Abuja, and what we hear is that you were discharged of your function. It's not a good tale to
It's
tell.
a serious indictment.
You just said it all. That's what it is. So on the individual level, it's a tale. It's not a good record. On the institution itself, and which the speaker did make an action over by discharging them, it's not a good tale. So the thing is, we need to keep having this kind of call-outs. What we also want to do at Other Paper is to find out, is to do a profile of all of these gentlemen who are chairpersons, or women who are chairpersons, or ladies and gentlemen who are chairpersons of these committees, and find out why they failed. Who are they? Call them out, reel out their names, their profile. What have they been doing? What is their excuse? Is it all about funding? What about the committees that performed? Were they also, did they have issues about funding? So it's not as simplistic, we didn't have funds. Some of it is just as simple as no leadership argument. I can tell you that for free.
I'll be honest with you. Okay, we're moving into 2023 now. It's about educating people on the choices to make. And it's not an emotional thing, all right? It's something that is based on results. You want somebody to represent you. You want to give somebody an opportunity, the privilege, I should say, of serving you at any level whatsoever. You need to be sure the person can deliver. We need to start looking beyond. It's key.
Capacity.
It's key. Like the chairman now of these committees, I would file them under the non-performing or failed column.
Precisely.
And then the ones who have delivered on their task, put them under the ones who have succeeded, and then we look further. I don't want to give a job to somebody who didn't complete the last one. It's simple logic.
Precisely. I mean, they have questions to answer when they come back home for re-election. That is, if they will. Why did you fail on this responsibility?
Oh, yes.
If you failed because of lack of funds, what about your colleagues who did not fail? Are they... I mean, what's your response to that? So Nigerians must also begin to take note of these things and use these as, objective performance indicators, to make judgment calls when it comes to elections.
Agreed.
It's very important, and that's why we're resolved to do that kind of reporting, to, bring out these individuals and say to Nigerians, say, look, these are the individuals involved, and this faces of failure, if you like.
Honestly, if there are problems, let's learn about them so we can fix them.
Precisely.
If it's a question of capacity and competence, then it's up to the people who sends them to the, chambers, the green or the red chambers. That's really how it works. All right. If you are just joining us, you're listening to Legislative Hour here on WeFM 106.3. My name is Camry, here in the studio with Oke Epia. He's the Executive Director of Order Paper. We've been going through rather, sad event at the National Assembly, which is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, the House basically adopting a motion to discharge some non-performing ad hoc committees, some of them set as far back as 2019. Excuses for their non-performance include the question of funding. But just like Oke has just pointed out, quite rightly so too, some other committees in the same House of Representatives have performed, have delivered. So what's the problem? And going forwards, we'd like to hear your thoughts. You can call it up on 0817 687 2132. Right, let's take the first call now. Good afternoon and welcome to the program. Hello?
Hello, Family.
Engineer Femi, welcome to the program.
Welcome, my brother.
Thanks.
Good to hear from you. Good afternoon to your guest as well.
Good afternoon.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my problem in Nigeria, with how we run government in Nigeria, is we sweep everything under the carpet. I mean, some ridiculous things. Do you know the multiply effect of lack of performance? It's worse. We can't even start calculating it. There are people that have lost their lives because of this lack of performance. There are people that have lost their job and economic means because of the lack of performance. There are decisions that can never be made right because of lack of performance. And then we just say, okay, we close the committee. How about investigating them and getting full details and penalizing them for lack of performance? Because it's not like, oh, you know what, we're begging you to do us a favor. You refuse to do us a favor. Okay, fine, we'll let you go. No, you swore to do this. It's a responsibility that you upheld and you swore on Bible or Quran. You swore an oath to do this. And then you have found one thing. And then, okay, let them just go. This let's go. No predictive measures. Nobody is made to pay for their crimes. It's why things are worsening in this country. Because there are really no lessons to learn for other people that are not performing. Tomorrow you find people that will come in and not perform still because these people have not been set as examples. Just like criminality, you don't deal with them, they'll get worse, and you find different colorations all over the place. This is where we are, my brother. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Femi. What do you make of his submission there?
Well, I mean, consequences. There must be consequences. People must be held accountable. That's the point, the summary I think I gather from what he has said. And I agree with him. Incidentally, the institution Parliament, does not have that kind of measure in place to mete out the kind of consequences I imagine he envisages or is talking about. But this is where the agency of citizenship comes in. As constituents, how do we feel when we get this kind of report that my representative in the House of Representatives failed to deliver on duties, given to him? I should have some sense of civic duty to mobilize all the citizens of the constituency to say, look, this is what is going on. Have you heard? What should be our reaction?
Quite right.
What should we do about this? We have a right to call him, to summon him to the People's Parliament, to come and explain to us that failure that was advertised in an embarrassing manner for our constituency. And if that does not happen, you wait for the next elections. Let it be on record that, okay, we voted against the re-election of this fellow because of this.
That's it.
So that's what I mean. The institution is evolving. Let us also learn to manage our expectation of the institution. The institution currently as it is may not be able to. In fact, I must commend the Speaker of the House of Representatives. I hardly do this, give them commendations. But, for taking this step, it's a bold statement to say, look, we are conscious of the kind of image that we have, and we want to make conscious steps to correct it. And without looking at faces or names, look, we have to, discharge you of these responsibilities. And that's a bold step.
It is.
It should be commended and encouraged to do more, even for some certain standing committees that are nowhere to be found in the performance of their duties. So if he has done his bits and the institution has been able to evolve to that level of doing this, what about us as citizens? That's the point I'm making. So it also, the ball comes back to us in our court. What should we do? What should be our reaction as citizens to this kind of development?
I do agree with you. Okay, thanks so much once again for spelling it out so clearly. Let's just take the next call. Good afternoon and welcome to the program.
Yes, good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us. Who are we speaking with?
Well, my name is Mr. Usman. I'm calling from Guarimpa.
Mr. Usman from Guarimpa, welcome back.
Well, first of all, let me appreciate the in-house analyst for sharing with us his set of experiences. Well, by the way, I just want to ask some questions regarding the legislative activities.
Okay.
In the issue of non-performance and what I do.
Yes.
For an erring legislator. So I just want to be enlightened about the process of a recall that was constitutionally in the 1999 Constitution. And again, when you look at the 8th Assembly, how it went in a kind of mouth and rat race between the executive and the legislature. This 9th Assembly is somewhat, I think it has contributed to the non-performance of the executive itself and also the legislature. When you look at the 8th Assembly, it has performed even better than this 9th Assembly. So what I just want to be clarified is that the issue of non-performance of an errant legislator, what are the processes of recall that are...
Okay. Okay, so thank you. I've noted your points, 2 points you've raised there, questions. So I'll have Oke respond accordingly. Thank you so much, Usman from Gwarimpa.
Well,
the process of recall, yes.
That's a drastic consequence, for the kind of context we're looking at. But again, it's not out of place. And I also want to acknowledge that it's in order for, raising that consideration. Because if I have someone who is not performing, it should not be go and repeat class like was said of a former governor in this country. Repeat the class. If I fail, so I should repeat it. No, you should be recalled. There is no chance for a second opportunity. You should be booted out of the place and are replaced by someone with capacity to perform. So raising the issue of recall, yes, but you and I know that the recall process is quite complicated. It's provided for in the Constitution, the 1999 Constitution as amended, and we have seen an attempt to test that provision of the Constitution in the last assembly, in the 8th assembly.
Kogi West.
Yeah, Kogi West, Dino Milai, and you also how that's ended. I like that there was an attempt to try that section of the Constitution. That it did not succeed does not mean that it cannot be activated subsequently.
Agreed.
But the technicalities and the cumbersomeness involved can also be daunting, and so you have to walk around the constituency, the registered voters. You have to have the petition, you have to have INEC play different roles, some of which are very technical and could even be challenged in court like we saw, and that process can be not only cumbersome, but it can also be long. I think that we'll have to find some time to talk about
it properly,
properly, and look at the practicability and the details of the recall process. But surely I agree with Mr. Usman that is an option that we should learn more about and see how to begin to activate it, with respect to cases of non-performance and gross, misbehavior, as the case may be.
All right, Engineer Femi and Usman, you two got a nice freebie from Camry. You got a waiver from me because I didn't ask you to name your legislators. I will do so, however, with the next caller. So I hope you're ready. Good afternoon and welcome to the program.
Yeah, Engineer Femi calling back.
Engineer Femi, right on the money. So, Engineer Femi, your legislators.
Yeah. My legislator?
Yes, Senator and Rep.
I don't even have an idea who they are.
All right, that's your first assignment for next Friday, okay?
Okay. Why I don't is because I did not like the way they contested, but someone else was supposed to win. I was there on ground and he didn't win. So I just told myself, what, this guy is not representing me. So that's basically it. I just wanted to ask a question though.
Go on.
At what point is the president impeachable? Now, I'm not saying at what point you will impeach him.
Yes.
Is he impeachable based on what we're seeing on ground? Is it not? Don't we have enough evidence for impeachment process to be escalated or something? That's just my question. And if it is, then how can it be raised?
All right, here's the thing, Engineer Femi. What I do understand, we'll try and set me straight as we go along. What I do understand is that the president can be impeached for treasonable offenses, grievous offenses, and this is where the problem lies, because it means it is open to interpretation of the people who intend to impeach him. That's the legislators. All right? A grievous offense is not a singular thing. It's what they deem, whatever they determine. And I think that's where the process of impeachment becomes a bit, clouded as far as we're concerned. It is up to them to interpret, all right, that he has done something that is so wrong, all right, that warrants the action to be taken. As to the exact process, it's very, very specific, all right? You can't just stand up and say, let's impeach the president and then we take a vote of count and that's it. No, as to the exact process, I'm not clear on that. But the terms, the conditions under which it can happen, as I said, it's open to the interpretation of your legislators. This much I do know. All right? Apart from treason, which is very clear. Everyone knows what treason is. You're working against the state. But grievous offences and whatnot is going to be whatever they deem to be grievous. For example, purchasing to Super Tucanos without appropriation, $496 million. I talked about it then. That was the president circumventing the process of appropriation. And we were told that he did it in anticipation of their approval. But what if the good people of Nigeria said, do you know what? We don't want planes. So if the assembly felt at that time that, no, that was a grievous offence, they could have brought articles of impeachment, brought impeachment proceedings before the president. So again, it's open to interpretation. I don't know if I'm online.
It's open to interpretation around the phrase they call gross misconduct.
Gross misconduct.
So
thank you.
They would say, the Constitution, stipulates gross misconduct, which can be interpreted very widely.
Oh yes.
What is also clear is that there is constitutional breach. So there are issues around constitutional breaches, which is obvious, and so this can be activated to commence impeachment proceedings. But much more than recall process, this is very, very cumbersome. The Constitution provides it to be so cumbersome, to be so all-encompassing that it is almost impossible to have the president impeached.
All right, let me ask you to hold our thoughts. Okay, let's take the next call. Good afternoon and welcome to the program. Dr. Jennings, welcome back.
I actually wanted to say misconduct. What is an impeachment? Impeachment simply means that the Congress or the people do not have confidence in the sitting president or the vice president or a governor. Impeachment, like you rightly said, takes a longer process and requires overwhelming majority to actually decide an impeachment process. And when impeachment is not properly followed, the impeached person can go to court, Supreme Court, to maybe overturn the impeachment or get it a proper justice or judgment. But in the U.S. case, Donald Trump was accused of abuse of office, obstruction of justice. The U.S. Congress, under representatives, under Nancy Pelosi, set up the committee to look into some of the perceived allegations against the Mr. President, but they didn't find enough evidence actually to remove the president from office. Although he was impeached, but when the matter went to the U.S. Senate, there was not enough reasons or evidence to actually remove the president from office. So everything was politically motivated. It was a witch hunt by the Democrats to take down President Donald Trump out of office. But in Nigeria, since a trillion tax, the first time they tried to do it during the Obasanjo regime, some folks in the Congress decided to say that Obasanjo must be impeached, but they didn't get the overwhelming majority. So it's a trillion tax. If you must impeach a president, you must have substantial evidence or facts that will, trigger that impeachment. Because sometimes impeachment across the world is politically motivated, especially if the president is not doing what they ought to do. But in our case, it's going to be difficult.
Okay.
It's going to be difficult for a president to be impeached in the Nigerian context.
All right.
I'm glad that the Supreme Court has finally given a judgment on who will represent me as a senator.
Great.
Now have a senator. Now have a senator, Senator Ibezim from my zone. Then I have a House of Representatives, a gentleman that used to be bank manager with Senate. He was commissioner in the old regime of Roger Sokocha. So it's Chike Okafor. I guess that's his name.
Yeah, right.
So, yes. So have a great day.
Thank you, Dr. Jennings. You too. All right, we are pressed for time as we wrap up the program. Douglas Baye Osage, the legislative aide we spoke with last week, he writes in on Facebook, he says, if a lot of frivolities and irrelevant spendings are cut off, there's enough money to carry out investigative public hearings. Okay, that's a part of the functions of the committee, not the entirety of their functions. But thank you so much for that, Douglas. Do appreciate it. All right. Okay, let me just quickly go through the meme and then call for your closing remarks. Right. This week's Monday meme centers around, again, legislative houses, their powers and privileges. And specifically, I'll be looking at the publications and reports. Now, it's going to. This meme is centered again on sections 24 to 27 of the powers and privileges of legislative houses as it relates to categories of offences surrounding publications of certain statements, writings, printing false copies of laws, and so on. Right. Let's start from section 24. Publication of certain statements and writings is an offence. 1. Any person who A. publishes any statement, whether in writing or otherwise, which falsely or scandalously defames the National Assembly or any committee thereof, or any person who publishes any writing reflecting on the character of the President or Speaker, as the case may be, of the National Assembly, or the Chairman of a committee of the National Assembly in the conduct of his duty as such President, Speaker, or Chairman, or any person who publishes any writing containing a gross, willful, or scandalous misrepresentation of the proceedings of the National Assembly or of the speech of any member in the proceedings of the National Assembly shall be guilty of an offence and will attract the appropriate punishments in that regard. And number 2, in this section, publish in relation to any writer, any person who in this section publishes in relation to any writing means... in this section, publish in relation to any writing means exhibiting in public or causing to be read or seen or showing or delivering or causing to be shown or delivered with the intent that the writing may be read or seen by any person. Now, section 25 talks about printing false copies of laws or proceedings. And it says, any person who prints or causes to be printed a copy of any act or law now or hereafter in force, or a copy of any report, paper, minutes or votes or proceedings of the National Assembly as purporting to have been printed by the government printer or under the authority of the National Assembly or by the President or Speaker, as the case may be, of the National Assembly, and the same is not so printed, or tenders in evidence any such copy as purporting to be so printed, having reasonable cause to know that it is not so printed, shall be guilty of an offence and will attract the necessary punishments. Section 26 talks about the protection of persons responsible for publications authorized by the National Assembly. And it says, Part 1, any person being a defendant in a civil or criminal proceedings instituted for or on account of or in respect of the publication by such person or by his servant, by order or under the authority of the National Assembly of any reports, papers, minutes, votes, or proceedings may, on given to the plaintiff or prosecutor as the case may be, 24 hours notice of his intention, bring A, before the court in which such civil or criminal proceedings are being held, a certificate under the hand of the President or the Speaker as the case may be of the National Assembly stating that the reports, papers, minutes, votes or proceedings in respect of which such civil or criminal proceedings have been instituted were published by such persons or servants by order or under the authority of the National Assembly. Or B, an affidavit verifying such certificates. Section 27, publication of extracts of proceedings without malice. In any civil or criminal proceedings for printing any extracts from an abstract of any report, paper, votes or proceedings published by or under the authority of the National Assembly, if the court or jury, as the case may be satisfied that such extract or abstract was published, bona fide and without malice, judgment or verdict, as the case may be, shall be entered for the defendant or so accused. Right, that brings to the end our meme for this week. I know it's a bit of legalese, but as we go along, your ear will become accustomed to hearing these things because it's important we educate ourselves on what they are and how they can impact our lives and the lives of those who serve us. Let me call for closing remarks now from okay. We have 30 seconds.
This meme you just read is very important because it speaks to the sensitivity of parliamentary reporting. Covering the parliament, which we have done for 6 years plus at other people, is a very delicate business. It's something that could land you in jail if you're not careful.
If you misrepresent what was said.
Exactly.
And so
and that's an essence, partly what you have just read out. And you call it legalist, but we have to know this and put it in our heads.
Absolutely do.
You know, it's like the judiciary, you have to be very careful, you know. Again, that's one way of saying we must recognize and appreciate all the journalists that cover the National Assembly. They do an awesome piece of work, you know, and with all the sensitivities and thin lines they have to navigate to get the reports that we read daily in our phones and in the newspapers. Well, in terms of closing remark, I wish we had time to discuss, you know, the drama of the exchange between the party caucuses in the National Assembly that happened this week, you know, over insecurity. You are aware that they have the opposition caucus, the minority caucus of the National Assembly, jointly the Senate and the House of Representatives came together and addressed the media, you know, falling short of saying the president has failed, you know, the president, you know, is absent and all of that. And, you know, 24 hours later, of course, there was a repost from, the ruling party.
Quite right.
You know, members of the ruling party came up to say, look, you know, we won't sit here and let you come up with suggestions that you want to bring up constitutional issues against the president. What does this say to me? It says to me, unfortunately and sadly, that the issues of insecurity is falling into the realm of politics, sadly. So that's all attempt. We would like to see concerted efforts, you know, bipartisan measures against insecurity. We may be losing it. Once they begin to speak around across partisan lines like this, I mean, so you see why we can't even be talking about impeachment. It's a far-fetched matter. But we may be digging deep into the search for solutions without having any if the parliament is already being divided openly around partisan.
All right, we will have to leave it there, unfortunately. But I'd love us to take up that matter because it is very important, security implications and so on and so forth. But thank you once again to the Executive Director of Order Paper, Oke Epia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Camry. You do a great job.
Thank you.
Keep it on. Thank you for being a great host.
Thank you so much. Right, that'll be it for Legislative Hour this week. Catch us again next Friday at 3 p.m. Until then, thanks so much for staying with WFM 106.3. Have yourselves a wonderful evening. My name's Camry, and I'm proud to call myself a Nigerian.